I'm still in the moment. But I'm not absorbed in the same way. But yet I have more clarity as to what I'm doing. So I actually have more freedom. I'm much more open to what I'm doing, and I'm not so taken away with what I think is happening, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, my mind is recalling similar experiences for myself. Yeah, without music, of course, I can barely hum a tune. Yes.
I'm sorry. How do I know I'm in mindfulness?
Okay, that's a good question. Did you want to return after you get your shot? Do you have a meditation practice? Okay. Is it a form of shamatha and vipassana? It's hard to recognize absorption and awareness until a certain amount of stability and mindfulness has taken place. It's just hard. So.
Back up one. How do I know I'm in mindfulness?
In a very mechanical way, one of the ways that you can know is in the initial meditation instruction. One of the forms of that instruction is literally counting your breaths. Now, the goal isn't numbers. Okay, the idea is that it becomes obvious when you're not mindful because your mind drifts off and you don't remember what number you're on. Okay, so what happens is your breath comes in, breath goes out. That's one. Goes in, goes out, that's two. Goes in, goes out, what was it, 2? No, maybe it was 3. You start back at 1. In a mechanical way, when you start getting to 10 on a regular basis and you're not somewhere else and not imagining it, that's a form of recognition of mindfulness in a very simple way. It's much deeper than that. There are different stages of mindfulness that you develop through your practice. But in the beginning, one of the ways to recognize is that. So what you're trying to do is every time you drift off, sometimes people think developing a meditation practice is like becoming a perfect breather. I should have a perfect in-breath and a perfect out-breath. Just flows right out into space. Perfect in. No, we're not learning how to breathe. Okay? What we're learning is how to bring our mind back when we forget the very simple instruction. Every time our mind drifts off, go in, go out, life. Oh, wait a minute. Thinking. Come back to the breath. 1, okay. 2. Oh, what time is it? How was it? Yeah. Oh, come back to the breath. Enlightenment thought, non-enlightenment thought, satori, terrible thoughts, horrible memories, back to the breath. You're training the mind to be where you want it to be when you want it to be there. I mean, if you really want to ask yourself a profound question, why does your mind ever come back? We won't engage in that one. But that's an interesting question when you think about it. Another interesting question for you to contemplate also is, people say, oh, I don't have a definition of art. And I say, no, you do have a definition of art. If you do make art, you have a definition of art. You must. How is that possible? I don't. Well, at a certain point you say, I'm going to make something, right? And at some point you say, it's done. How do you know it's done if you don't have a definition? There's something that's going on. The question is it an intuitive process, a thought process, both? What? So these are interesting things that come up and arise.
Question. Someone mentioned about getting high and feeling great about the creative process. I've been really curious. Meditation, I'm kind of new at meditation, and I'm being kind of, I'm getting the feeling that it's about not being swayed from the spot and being influenced, I guess, by outside stuff. You're kind of centered. So if there is no passion, there's no no high, then how can there be a creativity in that?
What was the end of that
Or is
question?
there?
How can there be creativity if there's no passion, if you're trying to constantly come back to this, how did you
This,
describe?
not get, not
Right.
get off the saddle
Right.
or something like that is called.
Right. Well, the reality is you become more passionate because you don't have the barriers any longer. We also use thoughts as a way of controlling things. Let me digress a little bit back to the earlier part of this talk, which I didn't go into quite as much as I should have. In terms of felt sense, I was trying to distinguish between emotional sense and felt sense. The emotional sense, emotions, first of all, I'm going to distinguish passion from that in a moment, but the emotions are actually colorful thoughts. We normally think of them as feelings, but they're colorful thoughts with rocket boosters attached to them. And we put all this energy, which we experience as tumultuous, conflicted emotions that come up. Now, there's two kinds of passion. There's the passion like, I want you in my life and I'm going to suck you dry to fill the empty hole that I have in my own existence. Okay? The whole vampire thing, right? Psychological vampire thing. That's one kind of passion. There's another kind of passion, and that is the passion to know, the passion to be kind, okay? Passion to understand. And that comes out of our basic nature. Now, so what happens is, hopefully what happens is, as you develop a meditative practice, is that emotional, conflicted emotion, passion, fill up the empty hole kind of thing, relaxes. Doesn't, for some of us it may never ever go away. It's just there, but you don't have to do it anymore. You realize that every time you suck somebody in and you do that number and toss their empty carcass away, that the next person who comes along and you do it over again, it doesn't do it. It really doesn't fill it up, right? But why do we love all these vampire movies? Okay? Okay? So, but when you begin to meditate, our basic, who we really are, comes alive and comes out. So we actually can have fun. There is the sublime. There is moments where it all comes together. There is great bliss. There is great wisdom. But when you read how they describe how that takes place, it still comes down to being fully in the moment, but more fully in the moment, more and more fully in the moment, so that we truly, fully experience things, because we're not shielded any longer. We're not shielded by our thoughts or our emotions or whatever. We're fully present. That's one of the reasons why it's so hard to meditate sometimes, because it's just all there, and we really feel it all. And it's just easier to keep moving, because if we keep moving, it may not catch up with us.
I thought you might say something about reactivity versus responsiveness
Oh,
in
yeah.
relation to what she said,
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
staying in the saddle and not
Yeah.
reacting. And
Yeah.
so maybe there's a difference between
Yeah.
just jumping out of the seat and reacting to every little
Right.
stimulus
Right.
versus having some mindful response,
Well, let me actually, since you actually said that quite well, I'm going to take a little other approach to that, which is the notion of spontaneity. A lot of us have this notion of sometimes interesting notions about spontaneity. I mean, what is spontaneity? I mean, to be spontaneous, let's just, well, we're running short of time, so let's just put it this way. To be spontaneous, you have to be tuned in. You have to be actually tuned in, fully tuned in. Otherwise, it's impulsiveness. Because that's reacting without thought. That's just reacting. Okay. So, in addition to impulsiveness, we have, I forgot what the other term is. But for spontaneity, you have to be tuned in. You have to be spontaneous. That means you have to be in touch with everything. So, to be spontaneous, there's no separation between you and what's going on. There's a kind of oneness. To be accurate, which is another thing to talk about just briefly, you actually have to separate yourself if you seek after accuracy alone. think about it, to be accurate, we want to measure. We have to see, we have to get our mental tape measure out or draw or something. We have to separate ourselves from it. So, but to be spontaneous, if you actually are spontaneous and you put that first, just like we're saying you can order your felt sense before your thought sense, just by simply meditating, you can actually allow spontaneity to occur first. And if you are spontaneous, you are accurate because you have tuned in. If you try to be accurate first, you can't be spontaneous because you're not one with anything. You're separate from everything. So the question is where does the role of discipline come in with this? Right? Discipline is coming back to square one over and over again, the way you come back to your breath. And spontaneity naturally arises out of that. If you try to be disciplined in the sense of, I must do this, it's such and such time, I must do my meditation practice, I'm going to follow my breath precisely, I'm going to make it to 10, I'm going to just keep track, there's no spontaneity. So the trick is everything has, it's not too tight, not too loose. That's one of the things Sakyam Mipham Rinpoche says over and over again. Not too tight, not too loose. And spontaneity arises out of that. You become accurate, and your discipline is not to come back to anything else other than being present over and over again. And it requires a lot of practice. How many people have said for years, oh, just be here now? That's great advice. But it's not easy. Anybody who's meditated knows it's not that easy to be here now. You're here for like microseconds, and then we're somewhere else, and then we come back, and over and over and over again. That's why it requires practice. That's why we sit and we sit and we sit. It's an investment, and it's hard. And it takes a lot of work. That's why anybody here who's younger, at least than me in this room, get started. I got started in the 70s, so so it's paying off now a little bit. At least I can give a talk. So put in your time while you can. It's better than a 401k in some ways. Someone back there, yes.
Second dumb question of the night since we came together. I missed, I think, the opening, but what I'm grappling with is the discussion that's going on around meditation and the actual creative work. And I'm a writer, and I have my own meditation practice, and I do that, and then I may go off and do the coffee or whatever.
Yeah.
And are you suggesting, or is there some kind of goal here to integrate within the practice of our art the meditative states, or is it, I kind of do it with the parentheses. There's a meditation before, and there's a meditation, but the actual work. Right.
Well, there actually is an answer to that. It may not be one that you want to hear. But that's what the Shambhala Art Education Program is about. What I'm doing here, obviously, is to try to inspire people to meditate and see that there's a potential for connecting that to the creative process, whatever their process is. The Shambhala Art Program is really about how you actually bridge the gap between meditation and your specific practice. We don't teach a specific practice, but how that takes place, how you develop what you see. We talk very much about in Shambhala art trying to see things as they are, and then whenever we seem to glimpse what things as they are, what is things as they are, and how do they manifest, and how can you engage in it, and that there actually is not just a creative process but a whole viewing process, and the difference between feedback and self-confirmation, and it goes on from there. We how to edit in a way that's contemplative, as opposed to what sometimes we do is just tear everything up and start over, or trash it, or get very angry, or something. That there's actually a contemplative way of doing it. So that gap between is this other educational process. But the first step is really to encourage everyone here to engage in this type of mindfulness and awareness practice, specifically because, at least in my experience, if I'm going to vouch for anything, is it works particularly well with the creative process, because to engage in the creative process, if you're not fully present, how can you do it? You have to be here. So you might as well learn how to be here, okay? And practice being here. And then the rest flowers from there. And then it's just going deeper, deeper into understanding what that means to be fully present, and how that just, you can engage in your creative process becomes a thing that comes through you as an individual by connecting to this material. So that was like an ad. By the way, there will be a Shambhala Art Intensive here in Los Angeles in January, in the beginning part of January. People often come from all over the world. There's very limited space, so if you are interested, there's brochure here, up there. You can go to the website, and just don't wait till the last minute to enroll.
Sorry, I missed the beginning as well. I just wondered, could you expand that from the meditative process to the creative, and then what about the intuitive process? Is a sense of knowing that that's just quite right?
Well, what mindfulness practice does is it develops a certain kind of clarity. And that clarity, out of that, naturally grows insight. Okay? So the intuitive process is both aspects of that. In other words, what you're doing is by developing a certain type of clarity, you begin to perceive that our experience is composed of two aspects: our felt sense, which is the intuitive process, and our thought sense, which is our knowledge and understanding and insight. So what meditation does is it encourages us to allow our felt sense and intuitive sense to arise, okay, and then our understanding, in some sense, can put it to work when we engage in the creative process. So, does that help at all?
Yeah.
Question, like I like this allegory about cards.
The analogy
Like
about
our
cars?
right?
Yes.
So let's say, is it about, this meditation is about learning how to, like at first I brush it off, so like, okay, I don't need this limo, taxi, and just getting very comfy here, just like I'm okay here, right? Or like, I actually have a choice of like, okay, I really like this car, can I go with this? So it's my creative process. I choose to get in this car and go, and it doesn't interrupt the meditation. So meaning, it's not like I'm awaiting or creating a space between thoughts, but I'm actually relaxing maybe in these feelings and thoughts.
Well, there seems to be a lot in, actually multiple questions that arise in your description. The first thing that arises for me in response is that meditation is, first of all, a way of slowing down. And calming down. That's why shamatha is often translated as calm abiding. We're just learning to develop a sense of peace. Okay? And we're actually, in some sense, calming the emotions. Not because we're saying, I shouldn't feel this way or anything. There's no suppression involved. It's just that you're giving it space. So when things arise, they tend to arise and tend to naturally dissipate. So you develop a certain type of calmness. So in terms of meditation practice, we encourage to allow that to take place. So the analogy of going along for the ride in the car is more that thought streams pop up and we want to entertain ourselves, really, because let's face it, folks, meditation is boring.
You see, that's where I'm lost, because it appears to me, maybe I'm wrong, but that thoughts and feelings are natural movement.
Yes?
It is so natural that, yes, it is my choice to relax in it, that's why I'm meditating, but it's not like I want to, jam this traffic, or I just, it's not like space that is not there, it's always there. It's like sort of me just being able to relax there. It's not like I want to okay, cars don't come in, or me not participating in this sports. It's sort of just being there.
So you're not making a decision to say cars don't come, cars anything. You're,
Yeah.
you're not making any decisions, your things come up and you're,
Just not reflect, not reacting on that sort of thing.
uh,
That's what, is it that? Well, that's what we're talking about.
yes,
You're letting them go by. You're not getting in the cab and getting carried off.
but it's also a little more than that. It's really just simply the practice of returning to your breath and bringing your mind back to the moment, regardless of what takes place. It's just really literally training the mind, and the mind doesn't like it. It rebels. It starts getting bored. It's not really boring, but it gets bored. It kind of creates, I'm not saying you, I'm
So I
saying
was
that's what
very
happens.
Yeah, and it was very bored for 10 years. And then it just became interesting. So that's why.
Yeah.
Seriously, it was very boring.
Yeah. Well, it actually is very interesting how the mind works. But what I encourage people to do is, while they're meditating, to just be there. Later, you can have all the interesting associations and connections and stuff out when the bell rings. But for the time when you're meditating, to just follow the instruction.
So don't jump in the cars.
Don't jump in the cars.
Okay.
And to do it for as long as you're actually devoted that particular time to sit. We have our whole lives are basically taken up with everything else but sitting down and being mindful. So we can take some time out of all of the years that we live, a few hours, hopefully each week, spread out, whatever, even if it's, we won't get into time spans right now, but to take that time to yourself. So in that time, we could spend some time practicing doing nothing as best we can. Sometimes meditation is described as coming as close as a human being can do nothing for a period of time without falling over or falling asleep. And some very interesting things happen.
So like, let's say like I'm breathing, I remember, oh, I need to do laundry, right?
Right.
So should I say to myself, I can think about it later?
There's a specific instruction. What you literally do is you say to yourself, thinking. You acknowledge it, you don't suppress it, and you let it go and come back to your breath. So, if I was I'm not giving full meditation instruction here, but basically you follow your breath. Follow your in-breath and your out-breath. Thought arises, thinking. Follow your in-breath, your out-breath, something itches. Thinking. You got to really scratch it, thinking, come back. Okay? It's a powerful tool to get your mind to come back to that simple moment of nowness.
Is there a point where you stop having to use that?
Yes.
Where you just drop that vehicle or whatever?
Yes, that's why it's important to get meditation instruction. By the way, meditation instruction is free here. And to establish a relationship with a meditation instructor, because your practice does evolve and the technique is tweaked as you go along. Because again, the purpose of meditation is not to become a perfect meditation practitioner of a technique. It's to train the mind. So the mind works a certain way, and at a certain point, the instruction is altered slightly to accommodate that. Does that help? Or at least clarify?
Going back to that, it's like, okay, feels like it's not adequate.
Have you received shamatha instruction at this center, or?
Up to level 3 right now.
Uh-huh. Do you have a meditation instructor that you're working with?
Only for a little while I was with Cynthia.
Uh-huh. Well, I would encourage you to go back to her, or if she's not available, or pick someone else, whatever. It's really just finding the kind of, two hands kind of thing, and working with the instructor to sometimes tweak that a little bit. But yes, at a certain point the technique drops away. However, I have to tell you, I mean, I've been doing this for 35 years. I've been to a month-long meditation. I've been to a Buddhist seminary. I still find myself very often coming back to just counting, the literal instruction over and over again. to settle in. So sometimes what we do is we know that, or we hear something like this, oh, you know, I can let go of the technique. But if you haven't really some mastery of the technique to begin with, and we let go of it too soon, then our mind just really wanders off more quickly, and we end up in a kind of mindfulness that's not really mindfulness. We're kind of mindful of actually not being mindful.
Because it feels like a mindfulness rut.
Right, right. So I would definitely encourage you to, you know, and then of course, you know, further study is also helpful. We should take maybe a couple more questions. And
In relation to that, I find it helpful not to analyze the meditation itself and more look to my life outside of it to figure out if it's working. I mean, because meditation in itself, in its own, in that however long you sit there, meditate for, like you were saying, letting it go and just giving that time for yourself. I think analyzing it in it or outside of it is going to make it harder in a way. It's really not, you don't meditate for the meditation itself, you meditate for how it's affecting your life outside of it. So that's, it's going to improve the action of your life. You're going to be more active, and it's going to, like you were, gentleman here was saying, it's going to, you know, be more focused outside of your life.
And I also want people to understand that there, you know, it's waves. Sometimes you know, develop a practice and your life sometimes feels like it's even more tumultuous. Sometimes it feels really calm and abiding. You know, part of it is to engage in meditation at all times when you can in your life as best you can, because you know, so many meditation masters have said some of the, you know, times when it's been most helpful ultimately, although seemed most challenging at the same time, was when they were having difficulties in their lives as well, and that sometimes when it's smooth in their life, maybe the meditation is a little too smooth. So I just want people to understand that this is being in the now is very powerful, and sometimes it's quite wonderful, and at times it's really scary, and sometimes it's really painful, because you're trying to be here and you're trying to let everything in. You're not trying to cut anything off. There's no suppression. So stuff comes up, stuff comes in, you know, and you start beginning to feel other people's pain and suffering. So it's a lot. As my wife will tell you, when she started to show interest, the first thing I said to her was, don't get involved. It's too hard. It takes too much time. Okay? Of course, it turned out that was the red flag that made her go for it. Right. So, but I just don't see there's really anything better to do. Two more and that's it.
You answered an earlier question about giving an example of mindfulness, and I think it was kind of the counting metaphor that you used.
It's a mechanical way, but it's helpful.
It's mechanical. And I think as you said that, you said, you know, this is a simple form, one of the lower levels of a simple form of articulating it. Not to put you on the spot, but you know, you're saying there's further levels of mindfulness. Could you articulate this?
Well, I think you're asking more about realization than you are mindfulness. It's more the notion that as you develop mindfulness, there are just different expressions of it that are more encompassing. I don't know that I'm really qualified to go through the 9 stages of mindfulness, particularly right now. But the one part that struck me in your question that I do want to address for people is this particular meditation that we're talking about, the initial. I'll tell you a little story my teacher told. This is very well abbreviated. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche was the 11th Trungpa, and he was, like a king of his monastery and part of Tibet and so forth, and he was recognized as a great teacher, and he went to his great teacher. And I'm probably going to butcher this story a little bit, but there were other young tulkus like him, in the age of 9 or 12 or whatever, and they would go in and come out and they would talk about, oh yes, I met with the teacher Rinpoche, Jomol Khantrul Rinpoche, and oh, I saw these great mandalas manifest in the room, and all these things happened, and Trungpa Rinpoche would go in to meet with his teacher, and his teacher would ask him what's happening, and he would say, well, nothing. And his teacher would smile and say, good, and then he'd go out and he'd be depressed. And this went on for quite a while. And then at one point he was meeting with his teacher, and the same thing happened. Well, what's going on? He says, in fact, his teacher asked him, what's your experience in the room? He says, well, I can see the incense burning, the lights coming through the window, and his teacher was very, very happy. And Trungpa Rinpoche said, well, isn't there something supposed to happen? I mean, what's, and is this it?
It's all the real.
And Jomol Khantrul Rinpoche said, this is it. And Trungpa Rinpoche said, really? And at that point, he got shamatha instruction. Because that's it. This is it. Doing this practice is profound. Yes, there are other things to do, but it's a little like walking and chewing gum. First is to deal with your mind and experience. Then you learn how to maybe do that while you're doing something else, and so forth. Does that help at all?
Sure. Yeah. Steve, perhaps you point out that Chogyam
Oh.
has the picture of him. Yes.
This is my root teacher, and that's my current teacher, and this is the founder of Shambhala, and this is his heir and son. So. Okay, this is the last question. It seems like everybody's interesting, so I'm letting it go long, but yes.
So mindful awareness then affects your creativity, or helps you, or allows you to open.
Benefits.
Because when I'm working well, I'm just taking dictation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it's always surprised me. I just don't say anything. I just shut up and let it happen.
Yeah. Well, you're from everything I hear, you're clearly tuned in, and the purpose of having this practice is so that in my, I don't know you, but my sense would be is that even if it does not for you benefit your musical practice, it will probably benefit your life or your enjoyment of your own abilities and the abilities of others. Because it's not just really the creative process. One of the things that we teach in the Shambhala art is the viewing process. It's also, we could say in a very simple way, art appreciation, but it's really more than that. Without being able to perceive in a contemplative way, it's very hard to work with our creative process, but at the same time, it just enriches our lives in a very profound way. I'll often take people through the museum and we'll engage in this contemplative viewing that we often do. And we'll be there with a group of people, and we're going through this exercise. And then, of course, invariably, as Chris knows, somebody will just run right up to the artwork, like the Van Gogh, and look at the label, and look at the artwork, and go. It's kind of what we do with our lives.
I had an art teacher once tell me to stand in front of a painting for 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I've never done that.
Yeah.
It's remarkable.
Well, I've never done the 3-hour one, but I have asked people to spend 15 or 20 minutes in front of something like the Jackson Pollock in the National Gallery in D.C., one of those paintings that he did, those drip paintings, so the larger ones that allow it to fill your field of vision, and just stand where you can just fills your field of vision, and just rest your senses on it for about 15 or 20 minutes, and something very amazing happens that you just didn't see. And it's better that you discover it yourself. Besides, how many people have walked by one of those drip paintings and say, well, my kid could have done it. Believe me, your kid couldn't have done it. You probably couldn't have done it, even with training. So something amazing kind of happens. And the truth of the matter is, in a lot of great works of art, that is true. There's so much that's actually going on there. There's an interesting book called Cognition in the Visual Arts by Robert Solsa. And he's shown through a number of studies that art historians actually see less in art than people who know nothing about art, actually perceive more. Okay. So we literally train ourselves out of how to perceive. And we're really saying by engaging in this kind of discipline we're talking about, we're training ourselves, retraining ourselves to how to perceive, as if we are, again, like children. But there is a benefit to growing old. Those thoughts turn into wisdom when we can actually capture that experience. All we're encouraging you in the meditative practice is to allow your experience to precede your knowledge. And in that sense, your knowledge can capture that experience. So we want to view the world like children, but we want to also have the wisdom that we've accumulated to actually appreciate, enjoy it, and achieve some kind of wisdom from it. So that may be a good place to close. So thank you for your patience. There's a lot of people in the room. It's a little warm, but everybody kept staying, so I figured I'll just keep going. Probably way over time on the videos.
Thank you.